This will end with fire, not fear. Ivory Coast youth spit fire. The words echoed like a battle cry through the crowded streets of Abidjan, carried by the voices of a generation long silenced, but no longer willing to be ignored. The phrase was more than just a slogan, it was a declaration of intent, a promise that the youth of Ivory Coast were ready to reclaim their future with a fierce determination that could not be quelled. In the sprawling neighborhoods of Abidjan, where graffiti-stained walls tell stories of struggle and hope, these words were painted in bold colors: orange, green, and white against the backdrop of a city that had seen too many promises broken. The vibrant murals depicted faces of young men and women, their eyes burning with resolve, their fists raised in solidarity. These images were not just art, they were symbols of resistance, a visual manifesto that spoke louder than any official statement ever could. Across the city, university campuses pulsed with restless energy. Lecture halls and dormitories buzzed with conversations about justice, equality, and the future. Students gathered in impromptu assemblies, debating strategies and sharing stories of oppression and resilience. The air was thick with anticipation, as if the very walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for the moment when the simmering discontent would ignite into a blaze of change. For too long, the youth of Ivory Coast had been marginalized, their voices drowned out by the noise of political power plays and economic interests that served only a privileged few. They had watched as their dreams were deferred, sacrificed on the altar of corruption and neglect. In a country rich with cocoa, gold, and oil, millions lived in poverty, their potential stifled by a system that seemed designed to keep them invisible. Yet, in the face of such adversity, the spirit of these young people remained unbroken. They were armed not with weapons, but with music that spoke truth to power, with art that challenged the status quo, and with the boundless connectivity of social media that allowed their message to spread like wildfire. Their fire was not one of destruction, but of renewal, a cleansing flame that sought to burn away the old and make way for something new. The streets of Abidjan became a stage for this awakening. From the bustling markets to quiet alleyways, the youth gathered to sing, to dance, to paint, and to organize. Their gatherings were peaceful but powerful, a testament to their belief that change could be achieved without violence. They understood that fear had long been a tool used against them, a weapon to keep them subdued. But now they chose fire as a metaphor for passion, for courage, for the unstoppable force of a generation refusing to be silenced. Music played a central role in this movement. Local artists like Issa, a young rapper from Abidjan, used their lyrics to articulate the frustrations and aspirations of their peers. His song spread rapidly through social media platforms, becoming anthems that united disparate communities under a common cause. The beats carried messages of hope and defiance, reminding listeners that they were not alone and that their struggle was part of a larger story of African resilience. Art, too, flourished as a form of resistance. Murals and street art transformed the cityscape into a living gallery of protest and possibility. Each brushstroke told a story of injustice, of dreams deferred, but also of unyielding hope. These visual expressions transcended language and literacy barriers, reaching people across generations and backgrounds. Social media amplified these voices beyond Ivory Coast's borders. Videos of peaceful protests, speeches by young activists, and images of vibrant murals circulated globally, drawing international attention and solidarity. The diaspora played a crucial role, using their platforms to support the movement financially and morally, bridging the gap between Ivorians at home and abroad. The government's attempts to suppress this rising tide of youth activism through internet blackouts, arrests, and intimidation only fueled the fire. Each act of repression was met with renewed vigor as the youth learned to adapt and innovate. They used encrypted messaging apps, organized flash mobs, and created decentralized networks that made it harder for authorities to dismantle their efforts. This fire was not confined to the streets of Abidjan. It spread to towns and villages across the country, where young people faced their own battles against poverty, unemployment, and political exclusion. In these communities, the movement took on local flavors but remained united by a shared vision, a future where their voices mattered, where their rights were respected, and where they could build lives of dignity and opportunity. The phrase "this will end with fire, not fear" encapsulated this spirit perfectly. It was a rejection of the status quo and a refusal to be cowed by threats or violence. It was a call to action that resonated deeply with a generation that had grown up witnessing the failures of those before them, but refused to be defined by those failures. As the sun set over Abidjan, casting long shadows over the city's skyline, the youth gathered once more. Their faces were illuminated by the flickering flames of candles and torches, symbols of their enduring hope. They sang songs of freedom and justice, their voices rising in a chorus that echoed through the night. This was not just a moment of protest, it was a moment of awakening. The fire they carried was a beacon, a light cutting through the darkness of oppression and despair. It was a promise that no matter how fierce the storm, the spirit of Ivory Coast's youth would burn bright, lighting the way toward a future shaped by their dreams and determination. And so the fire spreads unstoppable, unyielding and unafraid. This will end with fire, not fear. Ivory Coast is a paradox of wealth and want. Blessed with vast reserves of cocoa, gold, and oil, it is one of West Africa's richest nations. Yet, beneath the surface of economic growth lies a country grappling with deep inequalities and political unrest. President Alassane Ouattara, in power for over a decade, is both praised and vilified. His supporters credit him with stabilizing the country after years of civil war and fostering economic development. Critics accuse him of authoritarianism, electoral manipulation, and protecting foreign interests at the expense of ordinary Ivorians. The political system remains heavily centralized, with power concentrated in the hands of a few. Opposition parties face legal and political hurdles, and dissent is often met with repression. The youth, who constitute nearly 60% of the population, find themselves excluded from meaningful participation in governance and economic opportunity. The youth of Ivory Coast are not just numbers, they are the heartbeat of the nation. Yet many face bleak prospects. Unemployment rates among young people hover around 30 to 40%, with even higher figures in rural areas. Education, while improving, often fails to translate into jobs or empowerment. This generation grew up witnessing political instability, economic hardship, and government crackdowns on protests. They have seen their parents' struggles and inherited a legacy of frustration. But unlike previous generations, they have tools their elders did not: smartphones, social media, and access to global ideas and movements. Walk through Abidjan today, and you will see the signs of a movement in motion. Walls are covered with bold graffiti slogans: "No more silence, our future, our fight, and youth power." Music blares from open windows, where young people gather to share stories and plan their next steps. In the bustling markets of Abidjan, Issa, a 24-year-old rapper, performs his latest song, a fiery anthem calling out corruption, inequality, and the need for change. His lyrics resonate deeply with young Ivorians who see their own struggles reflected in his words. Nearby, Fatou, a 26-year-old activist and university graduate, organizes workshops teaching young women how to engage in politics and advocate for their rights. She believes that empowerment starts with education and that change is possible when the youth unite. Social media platforms like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and WhatsApp have become critical tools for mobilization. Hashtags such as YouthRise, IvoryCoop, and Fire Not Fear trend regularly, drawing attention both locally and internationally. Young Ivorians share videos of protests, expose government abuses, and coordinate gatherings. Amina, a social media influencer and documentary filmmaker, captures the movement's stories and broadcasts them beyond Ivory Coast's borders, amplifying the voices of the youth to a global audience. The movement is no longer confined to Ivory Coast. It has become a transnational call for justice and dignity. The government's reaction to the growing youth movement has been a mix of repression and rhetoric. Internet shutdowns during key protests aim to disrupt communication. Security forces have arrested prominent activists and used tear gas to disperse crowds. Yet these tactics have only strengthened the resolve of the youth. the fire they carry is not easily extinguished. Instead, it spreads fueled by frustration, creativity, and a shared vision for change. Sergeant Diallo, a young soldier stationed in Abidjan, embodies the internal tensions within the state's security forces. Raised in a modest family, Diallo joined the military seeking stability and a chance to serve his country. But witnessing the harsh crackdowns on peaceful protests has shaken his faith. He finds himself questioning orders, sympathizing with the youth's demands, and quietly supporting their cause where he can. Diallo's internal conflict highlights the cracks within the system and the possibility of change from within. As night falls over Abidjan, the city does not sleep. In dimly lit rooms and open courtyards, young Ivorians gather to plan. Issa writes new lyrics, Fata organizes logistics, Amina edits footage, and Diallo listens, torn but hopeful. The mood is tense but hopeful. They know the risks: arrests, violence, government backlash, but their determination outweighs fear. This is more than a protest, it is a movement that promises to reshape Ivory Coast's future. Why the unparalleled resolve, you might ask? Issa, who was born and raised in a working-class neighborhood, Issa turned to music as an outlet for his frustrations. His songs quickly gained popularity online, becoming the soundtrack for protests. Fatus, after graduating with honors, struggled to find work. Frustrated by the lack of opportunities for women, she founded a grassroots organization to empower young women through education and political engagement. She sees the movement as a chance to break cycles of marginalization. Amina, who was a filmmaker with a passion for social justice, Amina returned to Ivory Coast after years abroad. She uses her platform to document the youth movement, ensuring their stories reach audiences worldwide. Her work has attracted international attention and support. Diallo's torn between duty and conscience, Diallo secretly provides information to activists and tries to protect peaceful protesters from violence. His story illustrates the complex dynamics within the military and the potential for change from within. The youth movement in Ivory Coast is not an isolated phenomenon. It is part of a larger, powerful wave sweeping across Africa, a continent where young people are rising up with unprecedented energy and determination to demand accountability, employment, and an end to corruption. From the bustling streets of Dakar in Senegal to the revolutionary fervor in Sudan's capital, Khartoum, the voices of Africa's youth are growing louder, more organized, and impossible to ignore. This shared momentum is rooted in common experiences. Across diverse countries and cultures, young Africans face similar challenges: high unemployment, limited access to quality education, political exclusion, and the pervasive effects of corruption that siphon resources away from communities in need. These challenges are compounded by rapid urbanization, climate change, and economic inequality, creating a complex landscape that demands urgent attention. The struggles of youth in Ivory Coast resonate deeply with those in other African nations. In Senegal, young activists have mobilized against economic inequality and political repression, using peaceful protests and creative campaigns to demand change. In Sudan, youth played a pivotal role in the 2019 revolution that ousted longtime dictator Omar al-Bashir, demonstrating the transformative power of organized, sustained activism. In Nigeria, the EndSARS movement galvanized millions to protest police brutality, drawing international attention and inspiring solidarity across borders. In South Africa, youth-led movements challenge unemployment and systemic inequality, pushing for reforms that address the legacies of apartheid. These movements, while unique in their local contexts, share a common thread: a refusal to accept a future dictated by corruption, exclusion, and injustice. They are united by a belief that youth must be at the forefront of shaping Africa's destiny. Africa's demographic profile is unlike any other continent. With a median age of just 19 years, it is the youngest continent on Earth. This demographic reality means that the youth's voice is not just important, it is decisive. By 2050, Africa's population is projected to double, with the majority of new entrants into the workforce being young people. This presents both a challenge and an opportunity. Governments that fail to provide education, employment, and political inclusion risk social unrest and instability. Conversely, those that engage youth as partners in development can harness their energy and innovation to drive economic growth and social progress. In Ivory Coast, as in many African countries, the youth bulge is a double-edged sword. On one hand, it represents a vast reservoir of talent, creativity, and potential. On the other, it highlights the urgent need for policies that address youth unemployment, education quality, and civic participation. History and recent events have shown that ignoring the demands of young people can have dire consequences. The Arab Spring uprisings that swept North Africa and the Middle East in 2010 to 2011 were largely driven by youth frustrated with authoritarianism, unemployment, and corruption. The fallout from these uprisings reshaped the political landscape of the region, often violently. In sub-Saharan Africa, protests and unrest linked to youth dissatisfaction have become more frequent. In countries like Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, youth-led movements have challenged governments and military regimes, demanding transparency and accountability. These movements underscore the risks governments face when they marginalize the youth. Ivory Coast's youth movement fits within this broader pattern. The government's attempts to suppress protests and control information have only intensified youth activism. The message is clear: the youth will no longer be sidelined or silenced. Despite the challenges, Africa's youth hold the key to a peaceful and prosperous future. Their creativity, adaptability, and commitment to justice position them as catalysts for positive change. In Ivory Coast, young entrepreneurs are launching startups that leverage technology to solve local problems, from fintech solutions that increase financial inclusion to agricultural innovations that boost productivity. Young artists and musicians are using culture to foster unity and challenge divisive narratives. Moreover, youth-led civic organizations are promoting voter education, transparency, and anti-corruption campaigns. By participating in governance and holding leaders accountable, they are strengthening democratic institutions. The youth movements across Africa are increasingly interconnected. Regional bodies like the African Union have recognized the importance of youth engagement, launching initiatives aimed at empowering young people economically and politically. Cross-border collaborations among youth organizations are growing, fostering solidarity and shared learning. Digital campaigns transcend national boundaries, creating a pan-African youth identity rooted in shared aspirations and mutual support. International organizations and foreign governments have a role to play in supporting Africa's youth. Investments in education, job creation, and digital infrastructure are critical. However, support must be respectful of local contexts and driven by youth voices themselves. Too often, external interventions have been top-down or disconnected from grassroots realities. The most effective approaches empower young Africans as leaders and innovators, providing resources and platforms rather than prescriptions. Africa's youth are not just the leaders of tomorrow, they are the leaders of today. Ivory Coast's youth movement is a vibrant part of a continent-wide awakening that demands recognition, respect, and partnership. Governments that listen and respond to youth demands will find pathways to stability, growth, and democracy. Those that ignore this demographic reality risk unrest and missed opportunities. The fire burning in the hearts of young Ivorians and their peers across Africa is a force that cannot be contained. It is a call for justice, dignity, and a future shaped by the many, not the few. The youth of Ivory Coast are no longer waiting for change, they are creating it. Their fire is a powerful force, born from years of neglect and fueled by dreams of justice and dignity. As the city prepares for what may be a historic day, the question remains, will this fire bring renewal or destruction? For the youth, there is no turning back. They will face the future with courage, because this will end with fire, not fear. If you believe in the power of Africa's youth and the promise they hold for the continent's future, please like, share, and subscribe to stay informed on these transformative movements. Join the conversation and help amplify the voices of a generation ready to lead.